And we continue our Newsmaker archive series here. We have two segments in this half hour from June of 1989. And the first guest will be Gary Gray. This is kind of fun. This is one of those situations where the originally scheduled guest pulled a no-show. So Gary and Kevin had quite the interesting conversation. Again, this is from June 1989.
Newsmaker program at 17 minutes before the hour, and we're waiting to hear now from our guest. He didn't make it to the studio. We think maybe there was a little goof up, and we're hoping we're going to have him on the phone. Nope, we're not going to have him on the phone, apparently. Well, at least not for the moment. Now what do I do? But there you are. We're sort of caught. These things happen once in a while when our guests don't show.
I love to see you sweat.
Well, speaking of that, you've lived in many places, California and the Midwest and Arizona. I find this a very disappointing summer. It's so cool. I don't mind it not being terribly hot, although I do prefer hot to cold. But does this seem a lot cooler than usual?
Ray Wells said that we're in for some cooler than normal weather. He said this a month ago. Boy, he hit that right on the head.
Was he predicting for July? Has he predicted for July yet?
I haven't heard about July, but he said June would be cool. And last night we were in the 30s. As a matter of fact, the overnight low was 38 degrees, and that's ridiculous for June 12th.
Yeah. I bet a lot of people who have pools, and a lot of people do now have pools, haven't even bothered to open them up because it's so cold.
Yeah, well, it kind of loses incentive, when you got goosebumps before you even get to the water. But you're right, I did live in different areas of the country where I remember living in Las Vegas for 3 years, and I would come out of the radio station. It was so hot you couldn't even touch the steering wheel of a car. It was a dry heat, like they always say, but it was hot.
No, say that again, that even though it was supposed to be dry heat, it
was just scorch. You could actually fry an egg on the sidewalk, and that's no joke. It was really hot. You couldn't hardly get inside of the car.
Did you like that?
Well, I'm not a desert person, really. A lot of people do love it, and it's good for your body, I guess, providing, you have aches and pains. Not good for the skin, though, but 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It was an area where you had to have air conditioning. It was literally a survival unit. And we had the pool. You had to have a pool. And so afternoons, boy, I'd be underwater with a straw sticking out there.
I lived in Mississippi when I was in my early 20s. Lived there for 2 or 3 years.
Now, that's humid.
Yeah, that's really hot. Now, I didn't mind it because I used to like to swim every day. And I worked on the air from 6 in the morning. Listen to this, from 6 in the morning till 10.
Yeah.
That was it.
Rub it in.
And then I had to come back at night and do some recording, so I worked on the air. Maybe it was 5 till 9 or 6 till 10, something like that. But anyway, I had all the day off. Then I come back at night and do commercials.
Yeah.
So guess where I went every day?
You went swimming.
Absolutely, every single day.
And that's why today, when you walk around, you have to cover up your fins, because you broke out in fins, and he keeps them covered. Nobody knows this.
But I'll tell you something. I'm not sure that I could do this today. I was in Charleston last week, as you know, or the week before, I guess now. And the temperature there was in the 90s, and it was humid. It was very much like Mississippi.
Yeah.
And this time it bothered me. It didn't when I was young. This time it bothered me. And I said, I'm not sure I could really take that anymore.
I remember you talk about hot spots. I, of all places, would frequently go to Topeka, Kansas. I mentioned to you once before I belonged to the Kansas State Historical Society, the Old West stuff and everything. And so we'd make frequent trips there. And boy, for some reason, that heat in Topeka was just unbelievable. It was worse than the desert of Vegas or something, I guess, because of the humidity. But, I mean, literally, I was soaking wet in Topeka.
Now, you're from the Midwest originally.
Yeah.
Hilly country?
Well, no.
Rolling hills like we have?
Yeah,
rolling hills.
Kind of.
Didn't you find Kansas a little dull? So flat?
Well, that was more Nebraska. I didn't find that a whole lot of Kansas was that way. Certain areas are, and some areas aren't. It's just like Arizona did. You know that half of Arizona is all desert, and the other half is snow and mountains and everything. It's like two different states. And I kind of found that a little bit with Kansas in some areas there. But Nebraska is the one, to me, that's like a dinner plate.
Dreadfully dull.
Yeah.
Well, we were going to be talking about all these heavy issues today on the program. I don't want to bring all those heavy issues up to Gary Gray, but let's talk about...
Well, can I... One
Sure.
quick heavy issue?
Sure.
How's your weight doing?
You're nice. You know what? But, 6 pounds, I think.
You dropped 6 pounds?
Dropped 6 in a week.
You're kidding.
No?
You really did? 6 pounds?
Well, let me put
Wow.
it to you this way. I dropped 4.5 in 4 days. Okay?
Yeah.
This is the Diet Center program. 4.5 in 4 days. I'm going to guess that by now it's 6. I'll know later on when I get down and get checked. But I suspect it's 6 by now. Going at that pace.
See, Kevin had a little bit of a weight thing there. He was in a race with a pregnant lady, and he came in third. And he said, I'm losing some weight. And boy, you're really dropping the pounds.
No, I'll tell you what really happened. I went down to get a sport coat. And the guy said, 48. 48 long. Now, this is a guy who used to wear 40. Right?
Yeah.
48 long. I said, wait a minute. Something's got to give here. That's a bit much. And with that, I made a commitment, and I talked to the lovely lady there at Diet Center, and bingo.
But I found, I had kind of like the same thing not very long ago, and I found that one manufacturer of clothes, I wore one size, and another manufacturer, I wore yet another. Mm-hmm. They don't always agree on
That's
what's...
true, but this is the same company over and over again.
Yeah.
And when Franny said to me, Franny DeSanto said, it's 48 long, I said, Franny, recheck it.
Double check it, triple check it. He said, no, Kevin, it's 48 long.
48 long. Something's got to give here. we got to do something. That's kind of big.
Well, let's keep an eye on your weight thing. Maybe every once in a while we can kind of do an update on you, huh?
Very good.
Yeah.
We'll be back in a moment, friends. Savo is not with us, and we're listening to Gray and Dorn. And the interesting thing is it's going to be Gray and Gilmore and Gray in the next hour. So I'm afraid if you don't like Gary Gray, you're in for a rather dull day.
I'm going to have to get my mouth retreaded, I think. It's going to be a busy one here, but... Okay. We're doing Newsmaker programs.
Well, last week we had someone here about the Indians. TV Indians, a professor at Corning Community, and after the show, Gary said, I have some knowledge of that because I belong to the Kansas Historical Society, and you went into that with the idea of studying the old gunslingers?
Well, I was interested in the Old West and really got into it so much so that I joined the society and read about that stuff, and actually through the years visited many of the famous places that a lot of things happened in the Old West. Even when I was a kid, my folks, we went to Custer's Last Stand and that kind of thing, stood on the spot where that happened. And it's really kind of different to read about it and then actually go there and see for yourself. I wholeheartedly advise, whether it be a Western thing or any part of our heritage in this country, to go and see some of these things while you can, because it's something that you'll never forget. Mm-hmm. But as a kid, I remember Custer's Last Stand. Went to the Virginia cities in Nevada and in Montana. There were 2. Didn't see any sign of the Cartwrights, the Bonanza Gang. I don't know what happened to them.
Well, they were fictional, right?
Oh, yes, they were.
But I was surprised the other day when I was talking to that guy that there was no Matt Dillon. I thought there was a real Matt Dillon.
He was a composite of many Western characters. He was fictional. But there was one character who, Charlie Bassett is his name. He was Marshal of Dodge City, Kansas. And if you were to ask the originators of Gunsmoke who Matt Dillon was designed upon, if I could say it that way, it would be Charlie Bassett. He was a big, strong marshal, and one of his assistants, one of his deputies, was Wyatt Earp. Wyatt was never marshal of Dodge City.
But, they were, you correct me if I'm wrong, weren't those guys who were the lawmen really kind of sleazy guys who could have gone either way, and maybe sometimes did? Sometimes they were good guys and sometimes they were bad guys.
Boy, you've got that right. Taking money under the table and gambling when they should have been out. Hickok was terrible that way in Abilene, Kansas. Instead of out there doing his job, you'd find him in there gambling and whatever. But one thing they did that Western movies hardly ever portray, I wouldn't say never, but hardly ever, and it was smart. They would go out with a shotgun. Patrol the town with a shotgun. Mm-hmm. So if they had Western people coming around giving them problems, they had a couple of barrels aimed right at their head, and that took care of the case. And assassination was not uncommon in those days, whether it be assassinating a marshal or the marshal assassinating the scum, if you will.
And weren't some of those guys who were the lawmen, weren't they in fact crooks on the side? Some
Absolutely.
Of them, yeah. I mean, they might be with one gang, and they were just, what they were doing was really opening up the town for their own gang, in some cases. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. Even some of the famous ones. Wyatt Earp, for example, when he was young, was arrested for horse stealing, and Hickok was literally chased out of... where was it in Kansas when he was marshal there for shooting the soldiers? Shooting soldiers. He killed like 2 or 3 of them. And one of the, I don't have the name at the tip of my tongue, they put out not an APB, but a similar type thing on Hickok. He had to get out of town. They were after him.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's not like what you see in the movies and the television a whole lot. I wish it was, but...
Well, yeah, I was asking that prof the other day, Gary, about the gunfights. Why would a man go out on the street and reach for a 6-gun when he could carry a shotgun?
Yeah.
And get everybody? Did they actually do that? Did they go out with the 6 guns and shoot it out?
Very, very rarely. And the way it was done on rare occasions would be one guy would be on one end of town and the other guy would be on the other end of town, and they'd slowly walk toward each other. And when they got within range, or when somebody figured that they could pick off the other guy, that's the way they would do it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't this fast draw thing. Speed really wasn't the paramount issue in gunfights. It was the best shot and the steady hand.
Well, let me ask you this. Were there any, in your study of this, were there any of the lawmen who really were good men, who really did do a good job and were really out there for truth, justice, and the American way? Huh?
Bill Tillman is a very famous marshal. Anybody into Western historical people will know the name Bill Tillman, but my particular favorite was a guy named Tom Smith.
Tom Smith,
really? Yeah,
Okay.
no. He was the guy that ruled Abilene before Hickok with his fists. He was a cop in New York City, I think it was, and did not carry a gun. Can you imagine? And boy, they had a great deal of respect for Tom Smith. Even to this day, Tom Smith in Abilene is he's a martyr in that city.
Was he a martyr? Did he die?
He truly was. He was called out for the way he ended up. He ended up dying on the job. It's kind of gross. He was called out to this ranch, and they were waiting for him, but they didn't shoot him. They took care of him with an axe, and from behind. It was the only way you could put Tom Smith down, was from behind. He was really, truly a genuine Western hero.
Well, who was the other one that you mentioned? Tillman, did you say?
Yeah, Bill Tillman was... you didn't mess with Bill Tillman either, because he was truly a tough guy and was for law and order the American way, as you say. Mm-hmm. There weren't very many, but Tom Smith and Bill Tillman were 2 that come to mind.
As I remember it from what I read, and it was not anywhere near as extensive as your reading, was that the government would say, who are the best ones to patrol the crooks and the gangsters? I don't think they used the word gangster in those days. Other crooks and other gangsters, because they know where they are, they know who they are, and they also were able to rethink the whole thing the way a gangster might if they came upon a crime.
Absolutely.
So they grabbed crooks.
Absolutely, and these
Put
guys,
a badge on them.
These guys would go, unfortunately, in many cases where the most money was. And they could be wearing a badge, but if there was enough money for them to turn the other way or to even assist, that was not uncommon in the Old West.
Well, our time is about gone. I was simply going to take the paper today, the newspaper, and look at all these stories. For example, in West Germany, Gorby goes over to meet West Germany today. Now listen to this. A survey of West German residents by the West German Television Network said that 90% of the West Germans trust Gorbachev. Only 58% trust Bush, and only 50% trust their own leader, Kohl. And then we have the story of Jaroslawski over there in Poland, Jaroslawski is in Poland putting a wreath on the tomb of the unknown soldier. So we have the communists going both ways, and the people in Germany have greater trust in Gorbachev than they do in either Kohl, their own leader, or President Bush. I'm telling you, Gary, the world is upside down.
I was looking at your thing for tomorrow. You have the chief investigator for the Florida Crime Prevention Commission, is that right?
That's right. And he's going to be talking about, in the world where crime is on the increase. We don't have it here as bad as they do other places. Once in a while we go to the city, we know how awful they can be.
Well, I understand that the drug situation in Florida is just unbelievable.
Out of control.
Yeah.
Gary, thank you for being our guest. And how about that?
And we'll take a quick break and do another segment that was recorded from a show that was done live in June of 1989 as well, with an Anthony Buscaren talking about the communists in Poland that year. Stay with us.
The Classy Cafe and Deli on Main Street in Hornell is closed today and tomorrow, January 1st and 2nd, and will reopen this Thursday at 6 a.m. with a new and improved menu. Call the Classy Cafe at 661-4854 for takeout orders. Again, that number for takeout orders is 661-4854. Happy New Year from the Classy Cafe and Deli, Main Street, Hornell. And again, that number, 661-4854.
And checking in with meteorologist Rob Carolyn before we get back to our replaying of the old 1989 Newsmaker shows. What were you doing in 1989, Rob?
Finishing up college, sir, getting my degree in meteorology and starting my first job out of college on November 1st.
Where was your first job?
It was in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. I was working for the National Data Buoy Center at the Stennis Space Center.
What do you got for us for today, tomorrow, the next day?
Well, Brian, I've got to turn back towards cooler temperatures. We've been fairly mild so far this morning. A lot of us seeing temperatures early on in the 40s this morning, but it is colder to the west, already down to 38 in Buffalo, 38 in Dunkirk, and that cooler air is going to be working its way towards us. In fact, the cold spot right now is Wlea, and they're down to 32. We're going to be looking at mostly cloudy and breezy weather. Could squeeze out a stray snow flurry before the day comes to an end. We'll fall back through the 30s today. Sunrise this morning was at 7:39. It'll set tonight at 4:49. And we're also under a wind advisory until noon today. Now tonight, much colder weather pours into the region. We're partly to mostly cloudy. Nighttime lows between 15 and 20. Mixture of clouds and sun. Seasonably cold tomorrow. Highs 30 to 35. Weak disturbance will head our way from Ontario tomorrow night. We'll have clouds, a couple of flurries or snow showers, 25 to 30. We'll then turn partly sunny behind that system Thursday. Highs Thursday, 35 to 40, Brian.
Happy New Year, Rob.
Happy New Year, Brian. Enjoy the rest of the day.
And we continue our archive series. And when I say archives, I'm talking about boxes around offices with lots of cassettes in them. They used to do what they call air checks on cassette, which is when you take a listen to a show, see how it sounds, see how you can improve yourself. This was Kevin Dorn from June of 1989 with the Dr. Anthony Buscaren talking about communism in Poland at that time.
We're talking with Dr. Anthony Buscaren, and Dr. Buscaren, what's happening in Poland is certainly, if it weren't for the Chinese thing, would certainly be the number one story in our papers. I would hope it would be, because here we have a situation where the communists allowed an election which they obviously were going to lose and did lose. Now they're looking to solidarity to try to form a coalition government to try to give them, the communists, some kind of, I suppose, goodwill gesture, some kind of presence in the Polish community. What's going on in Poland, and how does that contrast with China?
Well, of course, it's a much different situation. The so-called election that recently took place, of course, was only a partial election in as much as the agreement between Solidarity and the communist regime allowed the regime to control two-thirds of the seats of the lower house of the Sejm, or parliament, so that the only contest were the one-third seats and all the seats in the Senate. Solidarity won almost all of those. Now, of course, the question comes up, who's going to govern? Solidarity is reluctant to form a coalition government with the communists because they don't want to do this until there is absolute democracy and a total chance for the Polish people to choose. There's no question in my mind the Polish people are 100% behind Solidarity, and I think that the days of General Jaruzelski and the communist regime are numbered. The only problem is I don't think the Soviets are going to sit back and allow Solidarity to take over complete control of Poland.
What do these events in China and Poland, what will they mean now to the Kremlin leadership? What kind of a reaction are they going to have to both events?
Well, Gorbachev, I think, was puzzled when he visited Peking, and he made an agreement with Deng Xiaoping, only to discover that the agreement he made with Deng Xiaoping was now in question as a result of the student revolt. I think that the events in China and Poland will certainly have their impact on the Soviet Union. And what we're seeing in the Soviet Union is not only unrest in the Baltic states and Georgia, Armenia, Ukraine, but once you open up the political system to questions and criticism, such as is happening now in the Soviet Union, it's going to be very difficult to stop it. And with the continuing economic problems in the Soviet Union, I think more and more people are going to desire and demand a change in the system, somewhat similar to that in China. But of course, in the Soviet Union, the regime is in much stronger control. The means of repression are much more effective than in China.
This is something that puzzled many people at the beginning of these student revolts, or whatever you want to call them, demonstrations. The youngsters were carrying signs praising Gorbachev, and yet just a few weeks before, Gorbachev had his troops use poison gas to put down a much smaller revolt in Georgia.
That's correct.
So how can they look to Gorbachev? Because here's a man who really did use repressive means, used them quickly, unlike the Chinese leaders, and probably headed off some problems before they could have gotten as serious as they did in China.
Well, I think that the media has given an impression of Gorbachev which is not real. And he feels that as long as the West continues to bail the Soviets out with assistance, loans, and high-tech transfers, that he can return to a hard line once he has solved his economic difficulties. He certainly is not going to surrender the monopoly position to the Communist Party.
Dr. Anthony Buscaren, thank you very much for being with us. We've been talking with Dr. Anthony Buscaren, a distinguished author and lecturer, about the situation in China, Poland, and the Soviet Union.
This is WLEA Hornell.
And now a newscast from ABC News. This is from April 19th, 1989.
From ABC News, I'm Joe Templeton. Americans had to dig a little deeper into the wallets at the checkout counter and gas pump last month. New figures released by the Labor Department this morning show consumer prices rose 0.5% in March. ABC's Tony Sargent says inflation so far this year has risen at a rate that worries some analysts.
Since December, inflation has racked up the sharpest three-month rise in 2 years. The past 12 months have brought the biggest living cost increase in over 6 years. Still, many forecasters doubt inflation will wind up topping 5% this year, with more of the same in 1990. But they say that depends on how soon higher interest rates slow the economy down, and how much. During March, supermarket prices took their biggest jump since last summer's drought, mainly meat, fish, and eggs. Energy prices, including gasoline, rose more than any time in a year and a half. Tony Sargent, ABC News, Washington.
The energy figures were collected before the oil spill in Alaska. Analysts expect the spill will send pump prices even higher in April. One other economic note, the Commerce Department reports housing starts dropped nearly 5.5% in March after a 12% drop in February. That's the first back-to-back drop in housing starts since June 1987.
And that was a newscast from April 19th, 1989. The whole show was 1989. Today, the first part was Kevin Dorn joking around and stalling for time, hoping a guest would call in, joking around with Gary Gray, our longtime morning man. We were lucky to have him. He used to work at KBIG out in Los Angeles, California. Great announcer and all-around great guy, Gary Gray. I'm sure that a lot of the people listening right now remember him. And then in segment 2, it was one of those 1989 Cold War segments. You couldn't say that word for too much longer after 1989. It's AM 1480 WLEA Hornell. I'm Brian O'Neill. Hope you join us tomorrow for a show with Kevin Dorn. And it was a pre-Newsmaker show. We call them Sound Off in those days. It was a show, 2 shows actually, one from October 16th, 1978, one from October 20th, 1978. And the topic was the local people calling in and talking about how they felt about a possible merger back in the fall of 1978 between Bethesda Hospital and St. James Hospital. And some very interesting information comes out of that. I'll let you hear it tomorrow here on AM 1480 WLEA Hornell. I'm Brian O'Neill. Stay with us. Kilmeade's next.